your organization works with government agencies in ways where you can't require Christian sorts of things in that. And so there are ways where you mentioned you're engaging women who practice Buddhism and things like that. But how, for you personally, how does the gospel undergird what it is you're doing in a way that's sustainable and motivational?
I think one of the things that occurred to me after graduating from seminary was, you do all this sort of theological thinking. There's kind of different ways that you approach theology. And one of those is that you reflect first and then you act. And then there's the other that's you act first and then you reflect and then you adapt. And I think coming from a Marine Corps family, I'm apt to act first. And I think what I walked away from my seminary experience really understanding is that we do what we believe. That talking about saying what we believe, that can have value, but for the most part, our lives are a reflection. And so, we've communicated to our staff and our supporters and folks that we can communicate that with, that our faith is enacted in the things that we do. It's in the quality of services, it's in the transparency in the way that we do things, it's in the way that, in working with the government, it would be very easy for us as an American organization to override a lot of government policy and do some workarounds. And instead, what we've done is we've invited them into the process and said, we want to follow what the dictates that you've set out before us, so that we're following policy and showing them that that we're there to be servants of Christ and that we're not there for selfish ambition and reasons. So I think the gospel is undergirded in everything that we do, what motivates the things that we do, and the way that we example the gospel in our everyday lives. And
we see in the Bible slavery language, and it's referring to us, slaves to sin, and Jesus being a redeemer of that slavery. So, Tom, how much of that, looking at your own life and your own salvation, brings a reflection of that redemption that we've experienced and allows a way for us to, in a visible way, to secular audiences and everything, to say that this is a microcosm of a greater slavery that also meets a real need in our physical world?
Sure. I think that first of all, and for me, I've traveled to India a number of times, and I've been able to sort of see and witness some of the injustices, I guess, up front, as James certainly has done as well. I think that in those types of situations, or even if you're sort of reading about it, or you see, say, a video, you can't help but just be disrupted, right? And you can't help at some level personalize it. And I think that is a natural thing for us to do as human beings. Because ultimately, from a Christian standpoint, we believe that we're created in the image of God. And when, individuals, people, boys, girls, men, women are mistreated in such extreme ways in particular, you can't help but, be able to think there's just something fundamentally wrong. I think that leads to a reflection upon, oneself, one's, dare I say it, even theology, because you have to be able to deal with sort of extreme injustices in this world and to be able to kind of view it through the lens of what we believe in. I'm of the view that, this type of work, if one is not a Christian, it must be so much harder, because I think, as I mentioned before, the fact that we do believe in a kingdom and that God is in control, that, He cares about each person, and that, we can be at the same time incredibly engaged, cry, shed tears, but at the same time, we can ultimately leave it up to God. That is incredibly empowering, and liberating at the same time. So, I'm of the view that, this type of work, the fact that it is, with JVI and with other organizations, and if you actually do research into sort of the human trafficking space, a lot of organizations can't be very explicit about it, but so many of them are Christian. And it's because, they are the ones who are not afraid to be out there to risk their lives and to do cutting edge work to bring about literally freedom to those who don't have it.
I was watching television the other day, and there was I think it was a National Geographic documentary on prostitution. So knowing that was my prep for you guys. But they talked about one of the bigger issues is working with legislation. But they really came back to, and this was again coming at it from a completely secular organization, and I think it was a unique finding they made. But it wasn't so much what do we do about the pimps, or what do we do with these girls. It's what do we do about the market. And so, James, how does a culture, specifically here in the United States, where on our smartphones, on our tablets, on our computers, how does a culture where pornography and sexually explicit materials, how does that create a market how does that influence the trends of human trafficking in terms of sex slavery?
So, just a really easy question. Thanks.
Yeah. If you could solve that.
I think that's just for you.
Yeah.
And have you met before?
Can I consult a lawyer, please?
Yeah, that's right.
On my answer. No, I mean, let me take a couple of steps back, because this is something that, as a side project, I've been working on. There was a Navy officer that several years ago had said there are three kinds of people in the world. There's sheep, there's wolves, and there's sheepdogs. And what he was talking about is that the public are the sheep, the wolves are the perpetrators, and those that are willing to stand in protection of those sheep are sheepdogs. They're people that are alert to the wolves that are amongst us. And one of the ongoing conversations that I've been having with men has been around the issue of pornography and prostitution. And one of the things that I can say to you guys as an audience, if you want to talk about beginning to deal with the root causes of sex trafficking, it has to do with the family. It has to do with the way that we're raising our sons and we're raising our daughters. I think that's one of the most critical pieces. If you were to ask me, like, how do you solve the issue of sexual exploitation, period, we need to strengthen family. Now, that aside, what should be frightening to us in our generation is, I remember as a young teenager going to a friend's house and finding, Playboy magazines under dad's bed and looking at pictures and, feeling that exhilaration. What should frighten us is now the average age of a child viewing pornography on a smartphone is 10. That young man is not looking at an image. They are viewing anywhere from 50 to 80 images in a minute. And that one of the things that I found startling, and I started meeting with some different researchers like Gary Wilson, who works with a great porn experiment. So if you guys are interested in looking at like some science behind this pornography issue, Gary Wilson and the Great Porn Experiment is a great place to look.
So wives, if you see that in your search history, this is allowed, okay?
Right. But what he's saying is that if you look at what's happening to a generation of men, and this bothers me as a man in my 40s, is that I'm watching young men grow up in a society in which we're almost propelling them towards this objectification and pornography and sort of hidden sexuality. And we're seeing a growing percentage of young men with attention deficit disorder, anxiety disorder. And Gary will tell you that he has a population of young men between the ages of 23 and 36 that are suffering from erectile dysfunction. Young, healthy men, and at the root cause is pornography. And so I think we have a very serious issue. I think that has led to issues of prostitution. I mean, and I don't want to point any fingers, but they say that if you are sitting in a population of men, 27% of American men have visited a prostitute at some point in their life. And so that means that 1/4 of our population, to the left or right of us, have purchased commercial sex at one point in their life. And there's some serious issues behind that. And so, I think we as a church have a responsibility to address this head on in a very real way, not just from the pulpit. But I also think that it really starts at home. We need to have serious conversations. I have a son, he's 22 now. We had very serious conversations about sexuality and pornography and what that's meant as a 22-year-old man. I have my son coming to me and asking meaningful questions about relationship and intimacy and sex. And that's what we want as parents, is to be the ones that can answer those questions rather than having searched the internet to find it.
That's great, and I love how in dealing with an issue that's larger than life today, it comes down to a family unit, which is something that God put in place as a plan for his creation. It's an institution that God has designed to function a certain way. And if you look at 1 Timothy, Thomas, we see that God also mentions that when government is working properly, that's the way things should be in terms of laws and legislation. So on your end, how is it, what are you doing when you're working with laws? James talked about before you arrived just the issues of laws being preventative and laws being hurdles sometimes. What is JVI doing in terms of instituting, helping, correcting, amending laws to help with this issue?
Sure. That's a great question, and just as an aside, I actually have a separate day job where I work on public policy issues, both legislative and regulatory, in a completely different context. It's always interesting as you sort of think about that type of work in whatever space, in promoting justice or making sure that traffic lights go up in the right place, or how the capital markets work. You always realize sort of the limits of laws and regulations, but at the same time you absolutely need them. So, to affect change in society, you always need sort of a holistic approach, right? You can't just legislate certain behavior and expect everyone to follow it. But at the same time, you need to do certain things. And so, in the history of this country, certainly with what happened during the civil rights movement, there were certain laws and certain, things that happened from a judicial context that, were for the better. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of mistakes being made right now that we're also seeing. I would say that, with JVI's work, what we try to do, and we try to do it in a pretty strategic and shrewd way, and also knowing our limitations, is, where there is an appropriate opportunity for advocacy. So there are certain rules that do need to be changed, or certain laws, say within a given area within, the country of India, for example. We try to use grassroots mechanisms or working with local leaders to affect some of those changes. I will say, though, that a lot of times it's not so much that the laws are not there, because, say, in India, it's completely illegal to have bonded labor or to traffic children into the sex trade. Absolutely illegal. But there's a lack of enforcement. And why is that? Well, there are complex issues, there's some corruption, lack of resources, and so forth. And so, that part of it, enforcing those good laws on the books, are just as important as some of the advocacy work for legal change.
So I'm going to ask each of you just one question in closing. I'm going to have Pastor John come up and close. And that's, how can we as Sovereign Hope, as we're considering this, in a large part, this is informational for us. I mean, the large part of the population is unaware of slavery as a whole, and we're way out here in the boondocks. And so we got internet yesterday. It's pretty neat. What can we do in the immediate, a major issue of prayer for both transitions and JVI?
It's a great question.
It's a softball.
I know.
That was my return for the porn question. So
No, I mean, one of the best things you guys can do is pray for us as an organization. I mean, we would covet a church's prayers. Second is, if you guys are looking for an organization to support, we'd really encourage you to take a look at Transitions. You can go to transitionsglobal.org. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter and all that happy stuff now that you guys have internet here in Montana. You can probably find
We've heard of an Android. Is that we can put it in our pockets and stuff? Yeah.
Anyhow. But again, I believe too, and I think Thomas would agree with me, is that you really need to figure out where God has your passions and follow that. And if that happens to be in either one of our direction, we'd love that. If not, we're happy to see you guys following God's heart wherever it leads you. So.
Yeah, and I would very much echo that. And I think, practically speaking, prayer for the work of JVI too, and for anyone interested, and we can leave some information as well. But if you go on to even the justiceventures.org website, you'll see opportunities to receive prayer updates. There are volunteer opportunities. And since you did get the internet yesterday, communication is really fast. But there are opportunities to get involved in doing the work of justice, even from the other side of the globe, from some of the work that we do in India and China. And so there are discrete projects. Some of it is more business oriented. Some of it is just helping through logistical things. Some of it is a little more legal, oriented as well. But very much opportunities to do that. And then I think lastly, I mentioned FreeSet as sort of one of the organizations that we work with. And one of the cool things that sort of is part of what JVI does is it's called Shop for Freedom. And so what we do is with some of the organizations that we partner with, including FreeSet, and there's a similar one in Beijing, China that we work with. These businesses employ women, most of who've gone through amazingly difficult circumstances, many of whom are victims of sex trafficking. But they create these incredible products. And all of those proceeds goes towards the work of justice. And so we've actually been sort of building that through a volunteer base, so that there are home sales that take place where these products can be distributed. But more than that, it's actually an opportunity to share with people about what's going on in certain parts of the world that otherwise we wouldn't see, and ultimately share about the importance of justice, and ultimately about even the gospel message.
Thomas, Kim, James Pond, thank you guys for coming.